Joan, in getting to know you a little bit ahead of the show, you mentioned to me that self-awareness is really the foundation of your work. In your mind and by your definition, what is self-awareness?
I think that as people, we have a version of ourselves that we present to the world. And that is certainly something that we believe wholeheartedly. I think self-awareness is validating how you see your strengths and your opportunities for growth. Because I think if you're well-intended, you think you connect with all different types of people, but often there could be attributes about the way you speak, about the way you act, your facial expressions that actually cause a person to be uncomfortable or fearful. And if you're not aware of what your natural tendencies are, you have a natural bias to think to yourself, it's more of your problem, Brad, than it actually is mine.
Yeah. Why is that so critical for leaders?
I think largely because when you look at the science, which we totally prescribe to, and it literally is the science of humankind. So we can go back to our caveman, cavewoman times and look at our neurological design, and there's not a lot of changes that have occurred through evolution. So we were very much designed with having more threat than we do reward. Survival, pretty much a basic instinct. Saber-tooth tiger, wife with a club, you know, those more simplistic things. Fast forward to today, and needless to say, we have a lot more stuff coming at us, right? So for leaders, if they're not in tune with what comes natural, I think it puts them at a distinct disadvantage because our whole life has been measured on IQ, how smart we are, what were our grades in school, what was our IQ score, things of that nature. But what we're seeing today is it's those high emotionally intelligent people that are really winning the race in leadership. You know, we're not a thinking brain that feels, we're actually a feeling brain that thinks.
I like that. How does self-awareness intersect with understanding body language? It sounds like the two go hand in hand.
Without a doubt, because again, your senses are continually surveying your world to make a determination about whether a person, a place, or a thing means you harm. Are they friend or foe? So, I mean, it literally could be a smell. But your vision very, very much is on the lookout for what perhaps can be harmful or happy. So if your boss is walking towards you very quickly with a Sour Patch Kid face, well, your natural instinct is to go primal. I have to defend myself, right? Well, it could have absolutely nothing to do with you and everything to do with the situation. So again, having that awareness makes such a huge difference in how you're presenting yourself.
Yeah, I went through a kick over here where I was very into understanding body language. And for me, it's a lot easier to do that if I were sitting in a room with you than it is on Zoom, or we record over a platform called Riverside, where, you know, I can tell if you're sitting in a chair and you're locking your feet around that chair, you're trying to ground yourself, you're a little bit uncomfortable. I get that. Or, you know, if we're talking at a networking event and you start to turn one foot out, it means you're trying to get away from me, and I can read that and I can see that. How do we understand EQ, body language, self-awareness in a remote setting?
Yeah, I think you have to understand, it kind of starts with the fundamentals. And I think the best way that I could describe it is if you've had some type of medical issue and you've gone to see a physician, specialist, whatever the case may be, they're going to speak with you and ask you about a series of symptoms. But traditionally, there's going to be some type of intervention. They're going to give you blood work. They're going to listen to your heart. It might be more serious in that they'll put you through a high-res MRI or a variety of interventions to get to what's going on inside. I think you really have to look at self-awareness and emotional intelligence that way. Is you have to look at the way we're designed as a person first. We're designed to be more fearful than we are to be more happy. So if a leader, if a person is more aware of that, and they see out, even in their Zoom audience, that there's things that are happening, especially in this triangle from like the eyes on down, if you look at it that way, what they can do is they can make a statement, they could make a joke, they could do something that through that recognition literally calms a person's nervous system. So what you need to do is you need to be able to use your senses, not for primal reasons. So if you ask me a question, we're designed to respond, right? When I ask you a question, I do so in order to understand. That's a very different type of interaction, right? Listening with empathy, not listening for judgment. We're designed to judge. So it's all of what we've learned about our humanity that is largely a falsehood. It's actually not accurate. And we continue to fall prey to judging ourselves when we're really just humans. And we have all these normal frailties.
Right. How do you coach that? So let's say somebody's listening now and maybe their boss doesn't listen to understand. They're listening because they're ready to say the next comment. How do you recommend somebody goes through the process of coaching another individual in the workplace? Say, listen to me as I am, right? Listen to what I'm saying before you're just trying to respond to that message.
Yeah, because again, if you're listening to respond, it's like you're almost using this autopilot neurologically. You're using your past to kind of dictate what this engagement looks like. So we are at the highest volume of managing up in American history. So middle level managers are making a huge difference to the people at the top. That in itself is a fascinating phenomenon that we could certainly do a whole session on. But if you get the interest of the other person, when you think about it, Brad, the size of our brain is very small in comparison to its duty and responsibility. 2% of your real estate. It takes 20% of your nutrition. So it is an energy hog. So if you see that your boss is really kind of stuck more in a fixed mindset or is responding that way, and you can get his attention. And how you do that is understanding that, again, we're more self-serving. Some behavioral styles more than others. So if you can make that about them, you have their interest. So if I said to you, Brad, what I understand is that you're hoping to achieve this goal is part of your legacy. Can we agree to that? And you say yes, because now I've used words that have elevated your status. Your legacy or your position or whatever. We're all designed to appreciate status, right down to the smallest of insects. That is a commonality. Now you're bringing a person towards you and you can have an interaction. Often what we do in communication, and we think it's about moving a message, which again, I think it's very much about honing your listening and not worrying about moving a message, because you could be moving a message in a totally inappropriate way. But if you listen to what that person is saying and you clarify that, then you could be really having an amazing conversation. So if you have a leader and you're able to hone in on what's important to him or her, their status, their growth, their next position, and you focus on that and say, hey, we're trying to achieve this goal, it takes them away from themselves personally, and it makes it more of a goal, like the Super Bowl, right? That's how that's a perfect example. We want to win the Super Bowl. We've never had that. Please. So that goal is very clear, right? I want to get the people on the field, in the office, in every single aspect who can get us to this outcome. So they make it about that. If someone's not in alignment with the goal, well, then there's a transition, right?
Yeah. Then you got to get off the bus,
right?
right? And,
so it's
and
the
we
same
could talk
type
about that
of
analogy
thing.
forever. Yeah, Joan, I could talk to you for hours. I'm trying to catch a wave here and see which way I want to take that. Thinking about being the right people in the right seats at the right time, and thinking about having the right people on the bus to get you to the playoffs, to get you to the Super Bowl is critical. Coaching up versus coaching down, really, Joan, that's a two-way street, right? You talked about how we can have the conversation with what would be upper management, but that should be a two-way street. We should be figuring out exactly what matters most to the individuals. I hate saying the word below us, but the individuals that report to us, to get the best out of them as well.
Without a doubt. But again, if you go back to the science, so if I'm in a C-suite or in a high-level position, or let's say I'm an owner, I am neurologically going to fall prey, just based on my humanity, to bias. So you and I are talking, and I absolutely believe that I know what it's like to be you. I've convinced myself of that. So again, low self-awareness. So I'm going to have a conversation with you, good, bad, or indifferent, and I think everything was amazing. 2 weeks later, you give me your notice. And I'm like, oh dear, right? That's why if they're saying right now, Brad, when they are looking at entrepreneurs through these high-res MRIs or a multi-scientific ways in which they approach this, entrepreneurs' brains actually look different. Just like a sociopath, right? If you look at a sociopath, they have less empathy. So we can get to a neurological cause of it. If you jump in to a house that's burning, we could look at your brain and find out you have more empathy. Neurologically, you're built that way, right?
Right.
So I think, again, before we judge a person, what I always encourage whoever I'm coaching to do is pretend they're a physician. Pretend you're something that has to diagnose or have some type of diagnostic test to say, what's at the core of this, right? Yeah. And I think that often the people at the top, in the bulk of situations, are well-meaning. They're just ill-informed. So what I do is I talk to them about humankind, and there's like this collective sigh of relief. Like, I don't go in there and say, Brad, let me share with you about how you're inadequate, right? All that does is really get your threat region all like you've got to protect yourself. But if you tell me something and I can tell you're self-loathing or self-judging or some type of unhealthy behavior, and I say to you, Brad, you know what? Shame on you for being human. You're like, oh my goodness. Right? Immediately it makes you feel better. So I think that's the difference is if we were to go back through evolution or anthropology or whatever the case may be, we have to understand that fundamentally we still have that makeup. So how do we work with it versus against it?
Can you coach empathy?
Absolutely. And you don't believe it in the beginning. Like, it is like a muscle you have to exercise. I had a very difficult time with introverts. They're very pensive, slow to respond. They're processors. And I would be like, I could drive to an out-of-town city. I could create a business. I could sell it and come back. And you haven't given a response. It would trigger me to the extent of it being incredibly stressful. Well, literally, I paid introverts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I was totally transparent and said, I can't just coach people like me. I have to be able to work with all humans. And I got to know them. I created a new experience in my worldview. I got outside of my in-group, which we're designed to be in an in-group.
Right. Want to fit
in. We're very much, again, in those origins of who were those people that protected you. Forgive me.
It's okay.
So again, having that knowledge, having that recognition just makes such a difference. And that's why when you look at the best places to work, when you look at a variety of like mergers and acquisitions and even the venture capital companies that are coming to me, what they're asking me about the companies that I coach is, what do the employees think of these leaders?
Yeah.
And that's never happened. That's all been post-pandemic. But they often don't want to invest in a company or a leader if they've got a bunch of unhappy people working there.
Yeah. You mentioned introverts and extroverts, and there's a great book. Actually, I have it right here. So, No Hard Feelings. I don't know if you've read this.
No, I haven't.
You haven't. So this is The Secret Power of Embracing Emotions at Work. Liz Fosslien and Molly West Duffy. The reason I mentioned it is my biggest takeaway when I read this book was the difference between introverts and extroverts in meetings. Extroverts, you can ask a question and they're shaking ready to answer, right? It's like holding a dog back on a leash. Introverts, at least their findings, and I'd love your thoughts on this, typically want 24 to 48 hours to respond on a question. So you could ask an introvert a question in a public forum, and they might be the single best expert on this topic. They're not going to answer it. They want to think about it. They want to calculate their thoughts. They want to come to a good general comment, and then they'll share their thoughts. And that was huge for me, that takeaway, because as you work with different people, Team Haley, we're a team of 80 over here, and there's a huge different range of extroverts and introverts, and making sure you're getting the best out of someone based on how they want to present their best form was huge for me. What's your thoughts from a managing standpoint or getting to understand introverts versus extroverts?
I don't even think we start appropriately. So for somebody like me who is direct and wants to get right to the issue, I then will traditionally disrespect someone who's coming into this meeting or engagement or interaction without the knowledge that I have in my mainframe. Sure. So again, I think that priming. So if we're going to have a meeting, why don't we send out an agenda and say, hey, here's our goal. Here's what our timeline is. We'd love to be able to go around and get input and send that out and almost let people do that processing in advance. But often who's scheduling those meetings are extroverts. So what are they not thinking of? Anybody else? Because again, I get a dopamine for being me. That's an amazing drug, right? This is awesome, right? Yeah. And then you have that introvert who's like, you lost me at hello, right? It's too quick. And again, it doesn't diminish their capacity. It doesn't diminish what they bring to the table, their IQ, the EQ. They have a different processing. Just like a server would, just like a computer would, depending on, how it's built. It's the same darn thing. So I think, again, we kid ourselves a lot because we convince ourselves that people are more like us. And again, that's just a natural thing that happens. But it's that taking time to reflect, that spacing. Like we have this meeting and we're working on this particular situation. I'm going to put this in writing, which again, the brain loves. But an extrovert, they love moving a message orally. Introvert, it's like, what? What's the assignment? Written down. Again, the brain prefers that. Right? So these are all the things, and we're going to see this with AI, right? Because if you and I went to ChatGPT right now and we asked it a question, well, it pulls, right, from everywhere. It's a lot quicker than if we Google it now, because now we have to click on all these different resources, right?
I only use ChatGPT for search now.
Exactly. Like people say Google, and I'm like, oh, okay. Right? Yeah. But again, those are the differences. Both amazing. But guess what? It's a different approach. So, excuse me. So I think, again, really understanding that and giving it the appropriate spacing, I definitely think benefits people. And that priming, think about it, Brad, like if you were going on vacation. You would never go to the airport. There would be those steps you had to do. Yeah. You'd be checking out tickets. Where do you want to go? But we don't do any of those things at work. We don't plan.
Yeah. So there was a talk that I gave probably 2 or 3 years ago. I've probably given it now 25 to 30 times, where I put together the roadmap for social media success. That turned into the roadmap for digital marketing success. But it talked about how the analogy was you need to know your end destination, right? So without knowing where you want to go on that family vacation, you can't put the strategy and tactics together. If we were just going to set out in our cars and say, hey, let's meet up in 4 days, who knows where everyone's going to go, right? So you need to reverse engineer that. I typically won't join a meeting if there's not a agenda set, because, and this might be a little self-serving, but I feel like everyone's time is incredibly valuable. And if we're going to join a meeting to talk for 5 minutes about what the meeting is going to be about, we are now wasting everybody's time. So my biggest thing, and I know I didn't do it specifically for the show because I like to have a general conversation, but any meeting that I set, these are the 3 things we're going to talk about. Here's why we're talking about it. Anything else you want to chat about so we can get on the agenda. And then if we need to talk about something else, great, let's talk about something else at another time. But I have found that that's the best way to get the most out of everybody involved.
Yeah, without a doubt. But again, I think that even when we look at our business, like when you look at the business from 5 years ago and where you are today, and I wonder how much time and consideration, because I don't see it, businesses spend saying, how are you as the employee prepared to do this role today and into tomorrow to get us to that next level? You know, have the key accountabilities been updated? Have the job descriptions been updated? Again, do we use job descriptions in more of a way for recruiting? But we don't use it for retention. We don't use it for a review. Right. Again, are job descriptions even pertinent? Maybe we should just have key accountabilities. But we are a pattern making machine. And we don't like when people disrupt our pattern. So often we fall prey to these stereotypes and these structures that just don't work anymore. And what I pride myself on being is a pattern breaker. Like, you need to break that pattern. And when you do that, the brain loves your pattern. It will stay on the brain couch. It will eat brain Cheetos. I mean, it loves to stay in this pattern. But not only is that unhealthy, because although an organ, it needs to work out, which means you need to get uncomfortable, which means if your second brain, your tummy, is telling you that it's uncomfortable, we got to be one of the few coaching associations in the country that thinks that's amazing. Because we know we're breaking your pattern. We know we're getting you to think. Your brain lights up like this beautiful rainbow.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that whole other thought. It's that whole other philosophy. It's good.
Yeah. It is good. Breaking habits is incredibly difficult. I know from being on my own, health journey over here, whatever it is, Joan, I can be great 99% of the time, but I promise you, if there is ice cream in the freezer, I'm going to eat it. I've given up alcohol. I go to the gym. I sit in the sauna. I do all this. We can't buy it in my house. My wife and I, we can't buy it. And if we do, we have to buy the real little sizes. I have a 2-year-old as well. So I say there for him, they're to trick my brain into saying, hey man, you are eating some ice cream, even though it's a little, 20 calorie thing instead of 14 scoops of cookies and cream. Right.
Right. And again, those type of things are absolutely fine. Everything is fine in moderation, right?
Of
and
course.
When you do maybe craft a new habit, people, we use a trimetrics EQ that was developed by neuroscientists in Arizona. And it measures your behaviors, it measures your motivators and your emotional intelligence. But it's, again, against a standard that's based on the national means. And people will say, well, how do I get to a higher score? And what I always say to them is, that's really up to you. This isn't about being the god of your industry. This is about what is affecting you. What is stressing you out? What is getting you away from being the best version of yourself? That's what we want to focus on. So for you, you take those scoops, okay?
Yeah.
Because if fundamentally the other metrics are good, give yourself a break. And I think that's what happens is through evolution, and I think we're very much seeing this in our young adults, and it very much bothers me. I think, again, we've gotten this idea in our head of perfection for the sake of, when really your metric should be happiness.
could not agree more. I had my wife actually make me a crew neck on her Cricut that says progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
And that's become honestly my motto and really my like mantra for the last, probably, I think Rachel made that for me in December. I wear that religiously. Because I have perfectionist tendencies. I'm okay accepting that. I'm okay accepting that as that's a little bit of who I am. But understanding that it's progress, not perfection, is what we're after every single day. And if we can just get 1% better every single day, then we're going to march a heck of a lot further than if we try other things, right?
And the brain prefers it. It prefers the bite-sized pieces. That's why New Year's resolutions don't work. But I think, again, when you talk about emotions and having this emotional intelligence, it's truly, when you have an emotional outburst, it's your brain's way of giving you this nudge to say, this is important to you, not to diminish it, not to admit it, not to try to justify it. It means something to you. And if it wasn't important, it would have been evolved out of us. And it is important. So it's that recognition. And I think we have such an unhealthy relationship with that. People are incredibly uncomfortable, because something in their past made it seem like it was inappropriate. I remember several people throughout my life saying, don't be so emotional, right? Who would ever say to you, don't digest food? Same thing. Who would ever say to you, don't take a breath? Same thing. It's that natural thing that happens to us. It's that ability to know that you've triggered me and have a healthy decision that leads to a better outcome. It's not to get rid of them.
So how do we do that in the workplace, right? So I'm all for feeling feelings. I could not agree with you more. You have somebody in the office where, maybe we have a leader who, they know team members are quick to snap, or they're a little erratic, or, that's just their personality type. They have these outbursts. How do we coach leaders to understand that we're all going through a spectrum of emotions and feelings? You don't know what happened to me on my way into work today. You don't know what happened to me, last night with my family or whatever it might be. How do you coach leaders to say, listen, it's okay to feel feelings, and it's okay to understand that your team is going through who knows what?
Without a doubt. But again, I think, you have to go back to how that particular person was developed over generations. Because what we know today about our brain is that it isn't just your parents that influence it. It's your grandparents. It's your great-grandparents, especially when it comes to trauma. So we carry a lot of baggage. And again, we inherit it for the most noble of reasons, to keep us safe, to keep us protected. But if we don't know that, we could react in a way that really isn't our natural, but our grandparents said, oh, you better be mindful of that. So I think, if you have a person who is acting out, you have to understand the ramifications for that. That stress is contagious. I mean, they're even looking at, Brad, now PTSD being contagious. So really, so again, I honor the fact that this is upsetting to you, but what we have to work towards, if we have to work towards you being able to recognize that trigger and then work through it, right? I don't think we do a good enough job with our police force. And I think when you look at the suicide rate, it speaks to that. I don't think we do a good enough job with our firemen, because again, in these very male-dominated industries, we very much have found that, men aren't men if they have emotions. Well, yes, they are, because they're human. All right? It has nothing to do with their gender. They're human. But we've put all these stereotypes on them. And now when you look at the suicide rate for a white man between like 35 and 53, it's alarming.
It's trending up since 2020, I believe. I was at the Massachusetts Staffing Association, and I think every year since 2020, that number has gone up significantly.
Yeah, and I mean, we need to be concerned about that. So I think, again, we have to be, and it's largely because I have an idea of what strength looks like, and emotions aren't part of that. Yes, they are. Because what we find for leaders is those vulnerable leaders, people are more connected to. It's all Brene Brown's work.
Yeah.
It's that vulnerability. The brain, absolutely. If the leader stands up and said, you know what, I didn't do that very well, I'm going to spend some time reflecting. If you come into my
Yeah.
office and I've got a scowl on my face, they know that I'm not speaking to myself.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't believe I did that. I need to spend some time
Yeah.
reflecting, right? This is
Yeah.
all part of your evolution. All learning. You should spend your whole life learning. You never stop learning, never stop growing.
Couldn't agree more. Joan, where should leaders get started? Right. So if somebody's listening today saying, this all sounds great, Joan, I hear you.
Yeah.
I don't know where the heck to get started with
Yeah.
this. I hope I'm not that kind of leader. I hope I'm not somebody who doesn't listen to my team or who is doing this in a meeting. Where do you suggest somebody get started? What's a good test they could take? Talk to me.
Data collection, right?
Okay.
Because this is not perfect, right? Like
Sure.
you're in a business where you're measuring metrics. You and I are in the same business. So
Yeah.
we generally do like an intake, talk about the goals.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be a coaching leader? Do you want to be a servant leader? Like, what is your ultimate goal? Then, have you done any surveys? Let us look at surveys. If surveys haven't been done, then we have to look at how we attack that. Have you had an assessment? Let us look at the assessment. So what we do is, even though I've had 4 decades and I've been in the brain-based space for a decade now, trained by neuroscientists, and we have a neuroscientist on our team, along with psychologists, psychiatrists, psychology. I mean, we've got PhDs in organizational development. We have certainly the data and the research behind us, but it's about the individual's goals. And then what we do is everything we do is customized. I wouldn't put together for you or your team a plan that I put together for the building next door. And I think that's what makes us so unique. And I am telling you, you see behavioral change literally in weeks instead of months and years.
Yeah. I was going to ask that. When should you expect to see change? How soon?
I mean, literally, when people got to a self-awareness, often the response is, I had no idea. When somebody is verbally abusive and I share with them that to the brain, it's the exact same thing as if you cold cock them on the side of the head, they are mortified.
Yeah.
They are mortified. They don't want to be that person. Again, they didn't know. So you have to give yourself the grace for not knowing, but it's 2024. And literally at a minimum, we should know and understand our human design and work with it versus against it. And the leaders who do, I am telling you, they are more profitable. Their turnover is greatly reduced. Their retention is through the roof. I mean, we monitor this data very closely.
How do you propose individuals who are listening that are in the staffing and recruiting industry, putting temps to work on a contract assignment, should they have this level of understanding of their temps as individuals who are working in an office setting with people, for years? How do you have the same level of understanding when you're working with temp workers?
I think, again, I don't think we just ask enough questions because I think we fall prey to assumptions, right? Like I owned a temporary agency, contract work, direct hire. I did it. And, again, when you're an owner, you think, well, we have every generation in the workforce, right? I mean, they're all coming from a different evolutionary perspective. So I think asking questions, what's purposeful for you? Why are you temping? In what way do you want to contribute? The younger generations are so maligned because shame on them. They want to have a purpose. Right? Our purpose was work. Their purpose is different. And we were part of building that new pattern. We've got to accept that. Right? My daughter has her master's degree in counseling. And guess what? She's using it on her 2-year-old and her 4-year-old. Now, I prefer that she use that at my nonprofit. But that's her decision. That's not mine. Right? And she's amazing.
Yeah.
So the same with my son. I cannot emphasize enough that ask questions, don't assume, and you will be blown away what people will tell you and how you will connect.
Yeah.
We're great tellers, especially extroverts, but we miss an opportunity to learn when we do that.
I love that idea. And I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is just from observing the staffing and recruiting industry now for about 11 years, it's a speed
Yeah.
game. You have an open job order. You need to fill it with talent yesterday.
Right.
And the perception is I don't have the time to ask these questions, because if I do, Joan, you're going to fill the order before me because you're not asking these
Right.
questions. But where I think there's the opportunity to have the courage to ask these questions is you can have a candidate and a person that you work with and you place forever once you get to know them at their core. You know, if we get out of the system of I put great person to work and great opportunity, put person B to great work opportunity B, and just sort of go through the motions, sure, speed wins. But if we want to build the lasting relationships and work with these individuals forever, then I think getting to know them makes a ton of sense.
I think, again, I don't know whether that's true or not true because I didn't ask my employers, right? Like,
Sure.
I've got that in
Sure.
my head. See, now again,
Sure.
if you went to your employers and said, hey, we're going to do concierge temp work, or we're going to take this extra step, and maybe it's 5 questions just when they send their resume in. It's a pop-up and they do this.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be robust. Doesn't have to be black
Right.
or white. What are the shades of gray, right? I think, again, would a company have patience for that? Is temporary as commodity driven as it used to be? And see, I don't think it is. And it was the same thing when we went to a retained search. Like the guy to the right of me and the guy to the left of me, they're not retained. Well, I got news for you. I am.
Right.
And you make a deposit, you pay midway, and you pay at the end. And if that's not an investment you want to make and a 98.9% retention rate, I respect you. I don't judge you.
Yeah.
You don't get my talent. And at the end of the day, we take a math and science approach to everything we do. And we have the data to support that that person is going to stay. They're going to contribute. And I promise you, you're going to see a huge return on the fee investment. I promise you. I mean, our retention is crazy because we get to know people at their core. So again, it could certainly be a slimmed down version, similar to the National Football League when they're bringing in or considering somebody for their roster, right? They have assessments, again, not robust, but they want to get a sense of their IQ and EQ. So I think, again, just be careful that you think it's that way, but when was the last time you really sat down with your clients?
Yeah.
And really,
great point.
Yeah. And what I find is when I ask companies that, most of the time, they're like, well, it's been years. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joan, before I let you go, I want to give you the opportunity to share a little bit about APA Solutions and yourself. So I want to give you the floor to do that.
Yeah. Very, very proud to be a 3rd generation company. I mean, in Western New York, and certainly we place, retain, and develop people across the United States, up into Canada, Toronto, over to Calgary. But 3 courageous women that wanted to be in very male-dominated industries and were clever enough to figure out how to do that in a time where that was unheard of. And with a legacy like that, we felt obligated to be disruptors. And now we certainly are. So I think full scale from just the recruiting to now we go right to succession planning. And we have a nonprofit now where we help high schoolers right on up to kids in college connect education to careers. Brad, there's over 2,000 choices. Do you know how many choices my parents had? 4, 5, 6, right?
Yeah.
It's overwhelming, right?
I changed majors 6 or 7 times.
Yeah.
Stayed an extra year in college, got an extra year worth of debt because of that. I love what you're doing.
Yeah. So I think, again, very much proud that we are still considered an innovator, still considered a thought leader. And at the core, we want to make sure that this amazing mechanism that people tend to take a lot of withdrawals from, give it its deposits, give it self-love, give it self-care, give it sleep, give it nutrition. These are not spa visits. It needs that. It needs that to be at its optimum. So I think we've done an amazing job of making a difference that way. Super passionate team. And I'm just very humbled and honored of what we've accomplished, how we've helped people.
Joan, it's been great talking to you. Before I let you go, I got to run you through our 2-question rapid fire round, and then you can get you on with your day. The first, one book that has fundamentally changed your life.
Oh boy, that's a tough one because I am such a constant reader, but I'll say it didn't start with me. Okay. And it literally goes back and talks about the past generations and how they infiltrate into your patterns. Fascinating.
Okay. And I tell listeners every episode, we're building a book club over here, and that's why I ask every question. But you can see the books behind me. Really, I'm building my own book club over here.
Yeah, there you go.
If everyone else gets some value out of what our guests share, great. But that's going to go right into my Amazon cart. So I appreciate you. And the second, for someone just stepping into a leadership role, what is your one piece of advice for them?
I would say that from a competency perspective, you're going to want to be focused on what the competencies are post-COVID and how to stretch those. And I think agility, resilience, like those very tangible things that we are definitely seeing in recruiting. Now companies are coming to us and saying, I want these particular skills. So it's absolutely fine if you don't have them. Be self-aware to know. That's great. But then work to build them. And the way that we're designed is you have to go through an experience. Go through an experience. And it will make a huge difference in how you view things. You can't, neuroplasticity, building those bigger connections does not come through this. It comes through action, comes through experience. And I'll tell you, I could show you a slide, Brad, of 3 months of working on something, and you would be blown away how we go from looking at a neuron that was Charlie Brown's Christmas tree, literally, to this beautiful evergreen. Work it out.
Yeah.
Work it out.
Joan, can't thank you enough for coming on this episode, of taking the stage and sharing all of your fantastic insights with us. Like I said, I could talk to you for hours, so we might have to get you back on for another episode. Really, really appreciate you. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much.